Good evening, everybody. Lovely to see so many people here this evening. It's my absolute pleasure and privilege to introduce Mr. Ian Austin MP. He's been a Member of Parliament for Dudley North since 2005 general election. Formerly a member of the Labour Party, he resigned from the party on the 22nd of February 2019 to sit as an independent. He served as Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State at the Department for Communities and Local Government from 2009 to 2010. He was appointed a political advisor to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, later Prime Minister Gordon Brown, in 1999. As I already mentioned, he held the position until his election in 2005 and was known as one of Brown's closest lieutenants. After Gordon Brown became Prime Minister in June 2007, Mr. Austin was tipped for a post in Brown's inner political circle. The following day, he was appointed Parliamentary Private Secretary to Gordon Brown with a special provision to attend cabinet meetings. He was moved to a new position in the 2008 reshuffle, becoming an assistant whip for the government. In the June 2009 reshuffle, he entered government as a minister for the first time, becoming Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State at the Department for Communities and Local Government and Minister for West Midlands. And yet, because he's a man of principle, and I'm sure you'll hear more about this, we know that he resigned and why he resigned. We'll hear more about it from him from the Labour Party. Yet, but throughout his time, supporter of Israel, Labour Friends of Israel, while Jonathan Goldstein of the Jewish Leadership Council referred to him as a friend and an ally. And one of the points I want to make about Mr. Austin, which is so powerful, and there's a very powerful Jewish message here as well. It's one thing for a person to be against that which is bad. Of course we need people to speak out against racism, against anti-Semitism, against intolerance. Judaism believes you have to go further than that. There's a more effective way that you have to speak out against that which is wrong. But a very powerful lesson that we learned from the late Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memory is that the best way to dispel darkness when there are negative forces is to bring light. So it's not just enough to speak out against that which is bad. You have to actively bring light and do things which are good. And Mr. Austin has not only spoken out against racism and anti-Semitism, but he has passionately and accurately made the case for Israel and supports actively wonderful projects. I was just looking on his website only last week. He backed an initiative in his own consistory called Shared Lives, helping vulnerable adults to live independently in their communities. He's passionately coming up with positive things to back, to help those with dementia, to help those with arthritis, to help those who are in need. And it's in that vein that not only has he spoken out against those who unfairly criticise Israel. You may know that recently, before Theresa May ended her tenure as Prime Minister, he was appointed an envoy, trade envoy to Israel. And that is all about cooperation. That is all about building bridges with people. And indeed, in 2016, Mr. Austin was writing about Israel and telling his colleagues in the Labour Party, when he was then part of it, that Israel is a multi-ethnic democracy. Every citizen is guaranteed equal rights under the law. All citizens have freedom of movement, assembly and speech. They can work where they want. They can have a relationship with and marry who they want. There's free speech and assembly for all. Universities, hospitals, public services, the civil service, the army are all integrated. There are Israeli Muslim ambassadors and diplomats and Arab serve as the heads of hospital departments, university professors. And he concluded in that particular piece they wrote that what we should be doing is working together to strengthen regional cooperation. In other words, it's about promoting goodness and truth and positivity. And that's the kind of person you want to get things done. Not only speaking about the bad, but actively working for the good. And that dispels a lot of darkness. And in that vein, here he is tonight, a very busy MP, after a particularly busy time, and here he is dispelling the darkness to come and share the good work that he's doing. So it's my great pleasure and privilege, Mr. Austin, to invite you to address us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very kind of you. Thank you. Well, look, it's a great honour and a great privilege to be invited here this evening. I want to thank all of you for for coming this evening to listen to me. And look, I want to start by thanking Rabbi Kleinman for organising this evening's event, for the warmth of your welcome, for your lovely kind words, your introduction to me, and for everything that you do for this synagogue, for the people of Leeds, for the Jewish community in this city. And I want to thank Martin Port as well. Martin, not just for inviting me this evening, but for your friendship and your encouragement and your support to me. And as well, Martin, I think for the contribution you make to the economy, the businesses you've established and the jobs you've created, and of course all the brilliant charitable work you do in this community and in Leeds, in the city of Leeds as well. And I want to say at the outset, I want to say to you all, look, I know this is a terrible time. I completely understand the offence and the hurt that has been caused to the Jewish community. And I want to apologise at the outset for this appalling situation. And with the Jewish New Year approaching, I know that this is a time for reflection on the past year and looking forward to the next one. And obviously it's a time of rising uncertainty for the country. But I think for the Jewish community in particular, it can be difficult to predict where we're going to be in a year's time. Will antisemitism continue to increase? Who will be running the country in 12 months' time? But I do want to promise you this, looking back and looking forward, I have and I will continue. I'll do everything I can, I promise you this, I'll do everything I can to prevent Jeremy Corbyn getting the keys to number 10. It's an absolute promise, all right? Now I want to start by telling you about a 10-year-old Jewish boy from a small industrial town called Ostrava in what was then Czechoslovakia. And one night in March 1939, he was awoken by a noise from the street, and he got up and peered out the window, and he saw the German soldiers marching into the town square. And it was the night that Hitler invaded. A few days later, he was waved off on a train by his mum and two teenage sisters. He was put on a train to come to the UK. He was the only member of his family to leave. It was the last time that he would see them. They were eventually rounded up, sent first to a ghetto, then to Theresienstadt, before finally being murdered in Treblinka in October 1942. Now he arrived in the UK at the age of 10, able to speak only 3 words of English. It's a true story: hot, cross and bun. That's all he could say. But he grew up to become the youngest grammar school headmaster in the country. He was honoured with an MBE for his services to education and to charity. And he brought up 4 children, of whom I'm the second. So as you can imagine, I grew up hearing about the Holocaust from my dad, hearing of stories about the suffering, the appalling cruelty, the industrial scale of the slaughter. And that left me with a lifelong conviction that prejudice leads to intolerance, then to victimisation, and eventually to persecution. And that taught me another lesson. It taught me that every single one of us has a duty not to stand by, but to make a difference, to fight discrimination, intolerance and bigotry wherever we find it. And I learnt important lessons growing up in Dudley. I learnt about the importance of our democracy, of fairness and tolerance, knowing what's right and what's wrong. Basic, decent British values. And I've fought intolerance and prejudice all my life. One of the main reasons I became interested in politics as a teenager was to fight racism. As a student, I volunteered for, it was then called Searchlight, now called Hope Not Hate. It's a campaign against racism. My first campaign when I became an MP was to work with local councillors and community groups to drive the BNP out of Dudley. As a Member of Parliament, I've done a lot of work with the Holocaust Educational Trust on Holocaust commemoration, helping organise government funding, which pays for students from every sixth form and college to travel to Auschwitz. Last year, I organised a rally against racism in the Birmingham Hotel, in the same room where Enoch Powell had made that infamous Rivers of Blood speech 50 years before. I've stood with Muslim constituents when they've been targeted by the BNP or the EDL. One of the main reasons that I joined the Labour Party as a teenager in Dudley 35 years ago was to fight racism. And you know, I could never have believed that I would end up leaving it because of racism too. The Labour Party, you know, has been my life, so this was the hardest decision I've ever had to take. But I've got to be honest, and the truth is that I had become ashamed of the Labour Party. under Jeremy Corbyn. I realised last year that I was going to have to leave, that I was going to have to do something. I spent a week in Poland with this brilliant project, March of the Living. I'm sure lots of you will know all about this. You spend a week visiting sites of ghettos and concentration camps. I'll never forget going to a forest clearing where thousands of people were murdered in a day, or going to Belzec, a tiny site about as big as 2 football pitches, but where hundreds of thousands of people were murdered. In 1 month, August 1942, 130,000 Jews killed at Belzec. And when you go there and you see the size of the place, it is absolutely stunning. Unforgettable experience. But the thing that really made a mark on me was the day before. It culminates with this march from Auschwitz to Birkenau. Thousands of people from around the world. It's a really moving ceremony, actually. All these Israeli kids with Israeli flags. A real act of defiance. So they're there. It's phenomenal. But the day before that, I was introduced at the hotel to a survivor called Ivor Pearl, who'd been incarcerated in Auschwitz. And they said to him, "Oh, Ivor, this is Ian Austin. He's a member of Parliament." And you think, "Oh, this is nice." And he looked up at me from his chair and he just said, "Which party?" And I said Labour. And he shot straight back. He said, "Are you not ashamed to be in the Labour Party with all the anti-Semitism?" That's what he said. And the truth is, I was ashamed. I was mortified. I knew the offence and the distress that Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party had caused the Jewish people. I'd been campaigning hard against it, speaking out, writing articles. I knew all that. But I also knew that it was not enough. It wasn't enough. It's terrible, that a culture of extremism, anti-Semitism and intolerance is driving out good MPs and decent people who've committed their life to mainstream politics. It's wrong that Luciana Berger, bullied out of the Labour Party by anti-Semites. It's wrong that the party threatened Margaret Hodge and me with disciplinary action when we spoke out about anti-Semitism. They had to back down because we'd done nothing wrong. But the hard truth is that the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn is tougher on the people who complain about racism than it is with the people responsible for it. That's the truth. Jeremy Corbyn and the people around him, I think, have turned the mainstream party into something very different. He spent his entire time in politics working with all sorts of extremists, in some cases terrorists, and anti-Semites. I always thought he was unfit to lead the Labour Party. I certainly think he is unfit to lead our country. I think they can't be trusted with our national security. I think they would undermine our democratic institutions. I respect the people I represent. I tell them the truth, and I could never ask them to make Jeremy Corbyn Prime Minister. That, in the end, is why I had to leave. And I want to talk about all of this evening. And I do really want to say this. It's very kind of you, the warmth of your welcome, and the support and the kindness that the Jewish community has shown to me is a great source of encouragement and strength. But the last thing anybody should be doing is thanking someone who was elected as a Labour MP for standing up to racism. It's the last thing anybody should be doing. As far as I'm concerned, it should be a basic requirement of the job. I'm not Jewish myself, as I said. Dudley, my constituency, there is literally no Jewish community. I used to joke that I used to get 100% of the Jewish vote, but it was only 3 people. It's not actually a joke, actually. Now look, some people, they said to me, "Look, you're not Jewish. Why are you doing this? Why are you making yourself a target?" But you know what? I think that if Luciana, or Louise Ellman, or Ruth Smeeth, or Margaret Hodge, I think that if they don't have a choice about tackling anti-Semitism, I think all of you don't have a choice about facing up to anti-Semitism. And I think that if they don't have a choice about this, and if you don't have a choice about this, then people like me shouldn't have a choice about it either. I don't have to be unemployed to fight for good jobs for people. I don't have to be sleeping on the streets to fight against homelessness. I don't have to be a Muslim to fight against Islamophobia. And I don't have to be Jewish to know that anti-Semitism is wrong. And I've never been more certain of anything in all my time in politics. I know my responsibility, and when it comes to this, a basic question of decency and fairness, of what's right and what's wrong, then I know whose side I'm on. I'm appalled that a party with such a proud history of fighting for fairness and decency and equality could have lost its way so badly. Under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, some, a minority, they go way beyond legitimately and passionately held views about the plight of the Palestinians and tip way over into anti-Semitism, some of them. But for others, it's much more fundamental. Ken Livingstone's nonsense about Adolf Hitler being a Zionist. Senior members legitimising myths that Jews were the chief financiers of the slave trade. The routine singling out of the world's only Jewish state for boycotts and sanctions. Outrageous comparisons between the actions of Israel and the crimes of the Nazis. These things are anti-Semitism, pure and simple. Jewish MPs, particularly women, have been subjected to the most horrendous abuse, terrible, violent threats, some of them being told they don't have human blood. A speaker at a Labour Party conference fringe meeting saying, the Holocaust, yes or no? The Holocaust, yes or no? What did he mean? That it happened? That it was right? What did he mean? Luciana needed to have police protection at the Labour Party conference. Labour members have now been arrested on suspicion of racial hatred. The Labour Party is the first political party in the country to be subject to a full inquiry by the Equality and Human Rights Commission, a statutory body, a full official investigation. Then there were those appalling revelations on that heartbreaking Panorama documentary a few weeks ago. Absolutely terrible to see how young people, decent young people, good members of staff, have been treated, some made ill, one even driven to contemplating suicide. And let's not forget that this crisis was triggered by the shocking discovery that Jeremy Corbyn had defended that grotesque racist mural on a wall in East London. That had nothing to do with Israel at all. And ask yourself, what would the Labour Party be saying? What would he be saying if a senior member of the Conservative Party was found defending a grotesque racist caricature about any other group? What would they be saying? So I was proud, to stand at that remarkable rally, the Enough is Enough rally outside Parliament a year or so ago. 2,000 people from the Jewish community gathering in protest outside our Parliament. But the thing that really struck me about that was that there was a lady there called Susan Pollock. She was born in Hungary in 1930. As a teenager, she was imprisoned in Auschwitz. She survived. She came to this country, brought up a family. She now spends her time travelling the country, speaking to colleges and schools about the Holocaust and about racism. And I first met her when she came to Dudley to speak at the annual Holocaust commemoration that I organised. And the second time I met her was at that demonstration. Here's an Auschwitz survivor in her 80s. The first ever political demonstration she'd been on in her life, and it was against the Labour Party. How anybody in the Labour Party could not see that and be so appalled and ashamed, I just don't understand. But there were only 30 MPs there. There should have been 230. One of them, a young woman, Rosie Duffield, from the newly elected MP from Canterbury, she went along. As a result, she was targeted by her local party for a motion of censure. They had to withdraw it, but nevertheless, they tried to do this. And the thing is, that could never have happened if 230 Labour MPs had been there instead of 30. And so I do worry that the failure of other people in the Labour Party to speak up and to do things about this, I think it leaves others who have been prepared to speak up about this, I think it leaves them more vulnerable. So you're not going to hear any nonsense from me about how this is all whipped up to prevent people speaking out about Israel, or weaponised, as they say, to undermine Jeremy Corbyn. What do they think? That I'm so worried about his plans to renationalise the railways, that we invent all of this. It's actually the other way around. The reason I never thought he should lead a mainstream political party is because he'd spent 30 and 40 years on the extreme fringes, mixing with all sorts of extremists. I wrote articles in 2015 warning about Corbyn's extremism. All of this, describing Hamas and Hezbollah as his friends, being paid to broadcast on press TV, all of this was known about before. And it's impossible to claim that it's been dealt with properly. Every single week brings new revelations in the Jewish Chronicle. One edition, just one, reported that a member of the Welsh Assembly dismissing fears about the safety of Cardiff's Jewish community and saying Israel's government is to blame for hostility towards Jews in Britain. Second, the same week, a Labour member who had produced videos to Jeremy Corbyn shared anti-Semitic material on social media, including claims the Holocaust was a hoax. And third, in the same week, a council in Tower Hamlets shared material claiming Israel staged the 9/11 and Paris terror attacks. Another edition had more examples, including, extraordinarily, a story about a Labour activist who was let off with just a warning after joking about slitting the throats of people who supported Israel and said Zionists should leave and return to Israel. But don't worry. He also said normal Jews, those not indoctrinated by the Zionist ideology, are more than welcome to stay as members and comrades. Let off with just a warning. What a disgrace. What a disgrace. Look at Chris Williamson, the MP for Derby. Complete disgrace that the Labour Party let him back in with barely a slap on the wrist. He's caused huge offence to Jewish people. He was finally suspended after claiming Labour had been too apologetic about anti-Semitism. This is someone who dismissed complaints about anti-Semitism as proxy wars and used a word that it's a word that I wouldn't repeat in a synagogue. He supported people suspended and expelled from the party for anti-Semitism. He attacked the Board of Deputies on the day of the Pittsburgh attack, and yet they still thought he was fit to be a member. To be fair, finally, there was an outcry, and the decision was overturned. But this is the thing. Tom Watson, the deputy leader, he organised a letter of protest and asked other MPs to sign it. The deputy leader of the party gives other MPs the authority to sign it, soaks up all the abuse. They said, isn't it great? They said, isn't it great? 100 MPs and peers have signed this letter. I thought, what about the rest of them? Only one member of the Shadow Cabinet signed Tom Watson's letter. Only one member. Do you know who that was? Tom Watson. Not a single other member of the Shadow Cabinet signed that letter. I'm afraid they're just not capable of dealing with this while Jeremy Corbyn's the leader. Look what happened last year. Even after that demonstration, there was a long argument about adopting the standard, internationally accepted definition of anti-Semitism. Even with the chief rabbi, 68 other rabbis. Look, 68 rabbis from all different strands of the Jewish community. Now look, I don't know much about the different strands of religious Judaism, but I do understand that uniting all of them is a pretty remarkable feat. All of them united, all of the communal organisations, all pleading with the Labour Party to adopt the international standard definition. The definition everybody else accepts and everybody works to. But even after all that, Corbyn still thought he knew more about anti-Semitism than the chief rabbi and everybody else, all of you, and insisted on adding extra caveats and proposing a statement which said it should not be, quote, regarded as anti-Semitic to describe Israel, its policies or the circumstances around its foundation as racist, which directly contradicts the IRA definition. When challenged about what he said about Hamas and Hezbollah, he says, oh, look, you have to work with all sorts of people in the pursuit of peace. What do you think about this? I mean, he's not even accepted the invitation from Labour's sister party in Israel to visit Yad Vashem. He would never call democratically elected members of the Israeli government his friends. He would never do that. Not that I'm suggesting for a minute there's any sort of balance between the terrorists of Hamas and the Israeli government. Of course I'm not. But the truth is that in all these situations, he only ever speaks to people on one side of the debate. You can't call that peacemaking. But he's so convinced of his virtue and his impeccable anti-racist credentials that he really does believe that he's the victim in all this. He really does believe that. And he's angrier when people complain about racism than he is with the people responsible for it. Look at their candidate at the recent Peterborough by-election. Not just accidentally liking a comment about Zionist slave masters, whatever they may be, but she approved a message claiming Islamic extremists were created by the CIA and Mossad, and signed a letter opposing the standard definition of anti-Semitism. Now I think there are 2 points I want to make about this. First, the Labour Party either did not care what she'd said, or didn't check what she'd said. But either way, it shows that the party's just not taking it seriously, as an institution and couldn't really care less about this problem. But the second thing, and I think this is a really appalling thing, is that before Jeremy Corbyn, whilst this sort of thing existed on the extreme fringes, it would never have been part of the mainstream discussion and debate in the Labour Party. But what we can see is how these appalling views, these crazed conspiracy theories, they've been brought out of the shadows, they've been made normal under Jeremy Corbyn. People who would never have thought about these issues before, who'd never have found Israel on a map, have certainly never met any Jewish people, they've become obsessed with it. They've become obsessed with it. And I think this is the point that the CST was making recently in a report it produced about how people have been radicalised on these issues under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. Now look, over the years I've heard people describe antisemitism as a virus. I've never really understood what they meant by that. But I think I do. I think when you look at these things, you really can see how that is an accurate description. There's this view on the left, you know, that they really believe that because they say they fought racism all their lives, they're really so virtuous, they can't be accused of anything less than the highest standards. And so people who accuse them of this, they must be making it up because they disagree with his politics or because they've got some other ulterior or dishonest motive, that they're manipulating people, conspiring to undermine him. This is what they think. They really have got a blind spot on all this. Look at the complaints they make about Donald Trump and his racism or allegations of Islamophobia in the Tory party. Now look, I'm not going to justify or defend these things. Of course I'm not. Who can think that the Labour Party is really in a position to complain when they've not dealt with the racism in their own party properly themselves? What right do they have? Who do they think is listening? I think this is the most insidious sort of aspect to all of this. There are some on the left who are genuinely anti-Semitic. There are more whose hatred of Israel has crossed the line. But there are young people, there are people, particularly young people, who've come into politics, got interested in this because of the surge in support for Jeremy Corbyn. And as a result, they've developed a sort of obsession about some of these issues. Support for the Palestinians and opposition to Israel has become a sort of signal or symbol of what it means to be virtuous on the left now. They think it's something different, new, fresh. They're enthusiastic in their support for him. And I think they really do believe that he's being targeted simply because he supports the Palestinians. That's, I think, is the most tragic thing about all of this. But, you know, it's not just on anti-Semitism that Jeremy Corbyn and the hard left have completely changed the Labour Party. The fact is that the Labour Party has never in its history had a leadership as far to the left as this one. Never. Jeremy's supporters, you know, they would dismiss all this as sort of bitter smears just designed to undermine him. But as I said before, the reason I didn't support him and have never been persuaded since is that I just don't think people with extreme views like his or John McDonnell's have got any role to play in leading a mainstream political party. On Northern Ireland, they were completely outside the mainstream of the Labour Party. It might be ancient history for lots of the party's new young recruits, but lots of older people will never forget what they said about the IRA during a brutal civil war which saw people being murdered on the streets of Britain. A few weeks after the IRA blew up the Grand Hotel in Brighton, murdered 5 people at the Tory party conference, Jeremy Corbyn invited 2 suspected IRA terrorists to the House of Commons. When the man responsible for planting the bomb was put on trial, he demonstrated outside the court. As recently as 2003, John McDonnell said those people involved in the armed struggle should be honoured. People, he said, had used bombs and bullets. Jeremy Corbyn was amongst a handful who opposed the Anglo-Irish Agreement. John McDonnell opposed setting up the Power-Sharing Assembly, which eventually became the Good Friday Agreement. I think the truth about Jeremy Corbyn is this. I don't think he can be trusted to uphold our country's values. I think to lead Britain, you must be a patriot. You must love this country. I think that disqualifies Jeremy Corbyn. I think he's the opposite of a patriot. I don't think he could be trusted with our national security. I don't think he could be trusted to defend our country at every available opportunity. He sides with its enemies, whether it's Hamas or the IRA. I think the hard left think that, you know, wealth is a problem, people who create it are the enemy. John McDonnell in the Treasury, this will be an entirely new development for our country. Our economy has never been run before by someone who said they want to overthrow capitalism, or cites Marx, Lenin and Trotsky as the most significant influences on his thought. No senior Labour figure in the past would have backed violent street protest, as John McDonnell did when he called for insurrection to to bring down the Tory government, or praised rioters who attacked the Conservative Party's offices in Westminster. I think they couldn't be trusted to uphold the independence of our civil service, the impartiality and fairness of our broadcasters, or the freedom of the press. And it's the same story abroad. No previous Labour leadership would have supported totalitarian dictatorships in Cuba and Venezuela, or would have echoed the Russian dictatorship's line on Ukraine, or taken money from the Iranian dictatorship's official state broadcaster. No previous Labour leader would have dared, would have dreamt of repeating Kremlin conspiracy theories when Russia was trying to kill people on the streets of the UK. And I think all this explains their hatred of Israel. I think people on the hard left, they regard it as a racist, imperialist project. This is what they think of it. For decades, they blamed every problem in the Middle East on the tiny state of Israel. They think it's a sort of relic of European colonialism, that it should never have been created. I hope that you won't be surprised to hear that I completely and vehemently reject this view. I have never, as Rabbi Kleinman said earlier, I've never shied away from standing up for the self-determination and the liberation of the Jewish people in the form of the Zionist movement. I think Israel is a 70-year miracle. I think the rest of the region should be learning from its extraordinary achievements. I want to see a viable Palestinian state, living peacefully alongside Israel. I've believed in that and campaigned for it throughout my entire life. You can disagree, have different views on the settlements, or this government policy, or that government policy. But Israel's critics should ask themselves this. Out of the 420 million Arab citizens in the Middle East, which ones will get to elect their government this year? 24 countries, stretching across 5 million square miles, from the beaches of the Med to the deserts of Africa, from the Atlantic to the Arabian Sea. Which of those countries, 24 countries, can legitimately call themselves a democracy? That's obviously not Syria, embroiled in a brutal civil war, 500,000 people killed. Libya's in carnage. Yemen, the world's biggest humanitarian catastrophe. Tragically, you're more likely to starve in Yemen than you would be to vote. Egypt's under a state of emergency. The president's main opponents were banned from running in the last election. The last election for 9 years did eventually take place in Lebanon last year, after it had been called off by the government 3 times. And elections take place in Iraq, but they're marred by corruption and violence. So apart from Tunisia, the only Arab citizens in the whole of the Middle East who get to elect the people who run their country live in Israel. Out of 420 million Arab citizens in the whole of the region, the only ones who really have a say in how their country's run are the 1.7 million living in Israel. Isn't that extraordinary? Isn't that extraordinary? All citizens, whatever their race, religion, ethnicity or heritage, have exactly the same rights at the ballot box. Critics of Israel and Zionism form political parties and campaigns. Go to the Knesset. I've been there. Some of its debates make our parliament look like a tea party. It's the most diverse and disputatious legislature in the world, with every shade of opinion represented, from the far left to the extreme right. Gay rights. Israel has one of the largest pride celebrations in the world. Imagine trying to do that in Iran or Iraq. So it's outrageous. It is an outrageous smear to hear Israel described as an apartheid state. It's an insult not just to the Middle East's only democracy, but to the black people who suffered under what was a strict and appalling system of racial segregation and discrimination. Isn't it an outrage to see on our campuses each year so-called Israel Apartheid Week? Isn't it a complete disgrace? I think the claim that Israel is a racist apartheid state is designed to isolate the country, to encourage boycotts and sanctions. I think these do huge damage to the prospects for peace because they drive people apart. They reduce the prospects for engagement, negotiation and compromise, which is the only way this conflict will ever really be solved. Look, of course Israel's not perfect. What country is? The conditions that the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza live in are difficult, in some cases desperate. And I want Britain to do everything it can to advance a peaceful and just resolution to this conflict, based on security, peace and justice for both peoples. But the only way to solve this is through talking and negotiating and through supporting engagement between Israelis and Palestinians, instead of measures like boycotts and sanctions, which just drive people further and further apart. So I want Britain to do much more to bring people together, to promote dialogue and build trust. I think the best contribution Britain can make is to develop closer links with Israel and the Palestinian Authority to promote economic development, trade and investment in the West Bank, to help reduce violence and terror and promote reconstruction and demilitarisation in Gaza as well. And given all of this, you can imagine that I was absolutely delighted to have been recently appointed as by the Prime Minister as the UK's trade envoy to Israel. The government has a network of these trade envoys working to promote trade with a range of countries around the world, and I'm really excited about the work we're going to be able to do over the next few, who knows how long, but in the coming period, with the brilliant team at our embassy in Tel Aviv. But look, I think the breadth and the depth and the potential of the UK's relationship with Israel is amazing on areas like technology, security, science, trade and investment. Last year, bilateral trade in goods reached $10 billion. Israeli investment in the UK created hundreds of new jobs. Science and innovation work is flourishing. Fantastic partnerships between British and Israeli researchers working on healthcare and environmental challenges. The UK's Israeli Tech Hub is helping organisations like the NHS and RBS and Jaguar Land Rover make the best use of Israeli technology. Brexit, I'm sure we'll be talking about that later, is obviously causing uncertainty, but I'll be working hard to engage companies, encourage exporters, and welcome Israeli businesses to the UK. Our two countries have signed a new trade agreement this year. There's a new defence relationship too, with the Chief of Defence Staff visiting Israel. Huge security cooperation. And I'm really looking forward to doing everything I can to bring our two countries closer together. And, of course, to combat anti-Israel sentiment when I see it here on the ground, like I've been doing my whole life, because this has never, as far as I'm concerned, been more important. And I just want to say this on this, with a hard left anti-Israel leadership in the Labour Party, with BDS movements in the UK and in Europe, with appalling campaigns on campuses, this work is needed now more than ever. And I just want to encourage all of you. I know through the Representative Council, I was hearing earlier about some of the brilliant work that you do, but I just want to encourage all of you, keep writing your letters, keep going to see members of Parliament, keep lobbying councillors. This has a huge impact, When I was first elected in 2005, I only used to receive letters from people who were very critical of Israel. That's changing now, and it makes a real difference. I want to tell you about this. 35 years ago, a young student at Hull University was invited to Friday night dinner by a friend of his. He came from a town in the Midlands where he'd never met a Jewish person before he went to university. He was invited to Friday night dinner, and that engagement, all those years ago, has resulted in that young student, now the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Tom Watson, growing up to be a strong supporter of Israel and a strong supporter of the Jewish people in our country. So you never know what seed's going to be planted, right? What difference the letters, the lobbying, the campaigning work that you do can make. So it's really important that you carry on with all of this. Now look, just before I finish, I want to say this. So what can, in the end, be done about Jeremy Corbyn and the party he's created? How long are decent Labour MPs going to put up with this? You know, they'll use this week's events, they'll try to persuade themselves that Boris Johnson's so terrible. That doesn't mean that you should be trying to make somebody like Jeremy Corbyn Prime Minister. People are going to have to decide whether they can really knock on people's doors and tell them Jeremy Corbyn should lead our country. That's what it's going to come down to. And I knew that I could never do that. I think we're long past this point now. Surely people know in their hearts that he's allowed the party to be poisoned by racism and extremism, that he has said and done things himself which are racist, that he's completely unfit to lead the Labour Party, let alone our country. I didn't leave the Labour Party to join another party, or because I was running away from the fight. I left to shine a spotlight on what's happening and to demand other people step up. That's why I left. And I just want to say these three things before I finish. First, do not underestimate the support out there for the Jewish community. Even in Dudley, a town with no Jewish people at all, people stop me in the street, they come up to me in cafes or pubs. I was at the dentist, and the dentist was saying, the opticians, telling me they agreed with me on this. I have never had so many supportive emails, letters and phone calls. Decent British people know that what's going on is wrong. They might not understand the detail and the theory and the history of anti-Semitism, but they know it smells bad. They know when something's gone wrong. The second thing I just want to say is this. I promise you all this evening, I'm going to do everything I can to fight this evil. I promise you that. Because if you're not in politics, to stand up and to tell the truth and to do the right thing on an issue as fundamental as racism, what are you in it for? What are you in it for? And finally, I just want to wish you all a healthy and sweet new year, and may you be inscribed in the book of life. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we open it up to questions, and our wonderful technical operator, as always, Barry, said, all people need to do is indicate, well, when we obviously will make sure we get as many of your questions in as possible. I just said to Ian, is that right? Yeah. He's such a good friend of ours, you see. So I said to him, how long have you got? He went, as long as you need, but obviously we'll have to get a sense of moderation, because we've got a keen audience here. So when somebody wishes to speak, Barry will bring the microphone to you before you start speaking, and that way we'll all be able to hear the question. Okay, so unsurprisingly, Lawrence has got his hand up already, so if you'd like to send the mic please to Lawrence, Barry, thank you very much.
First of all, on behalf of the whole of the Jewish community, thank you.
Thanks, Lawrence.
I spend a fair bit of my time speaking to people who don't always agree with me. It's nice to hear somebody who I do agree with. The question I want to ask is this. You left the Labour Party, others stayed. Smith, Margaret Hodge, etc. We as a community have a debate internally about what engagement as a community we should have with people we would call friends within the Labour Party. And I'm talking locally about members of Parliament such as Billy Benn, such as Rachel Reeves, etc. People who are long-standing and close friends. What is your view about the engagement we should have with people we have traditionally called friends within the Labour Party? Not the Labour leadership. I can't tell this audience that I did turn down a meeting with Jeremy Corbyn because of the behaviour he displayed to our community and the fact he was choosing who he spoke to rather than being told who the community leaders were. So we say no to people, we're very happy to do that. But I'm talking about our friends who are not the leaders. What's your view about that?
I think that people like, Rachel Reeves is a friend of mine. I think she's a good person, a decent person. Look, it's not for me to tell people that they should leave the Labour Party. I mean, I stayed in it long enough while I was sort of wrestling with this thing. But I do think that, so of course, look, you should engage with these people, of course, put your arguments, make them understand how appalling the situation is, how distressed the Jewish community is, and how much you think decent people have got to stand up for what's right. And I do think in the end that, that Labour MPs have got to do much more. People said to me, look, Ian, you've got to stay and fight. I said, that's fine, but where's the fight? I felt that too many people are sort of going around ignoring all of this. I think they sort of, some of them act like, they're like sort of chickens at the back of the hen house, hoping that the fox will be fuller when it's dealt with, when it's dealt with those of us who are standing up and fighting on this issue. I think that if every Labour MP stood up and fought on this, you'd see change much more quickly. By the way, I mean, you said at the beginning, I think you said Ruth Smeeth, Margaret. I mean, I certainly wouldn't tell Jewish MPs what they should or shouldn't be doing on this. And I don't expect Jewish MPs to be doing I mean, I think all MPs should be doing more on this, irrespective of whether they're Jewish or not. I think it's a basic question of decency and fairness and of what's right and what's wrong. And if, as I said at the end there, if people are not in politics to stand up on racism, what are they in it for?
Okay, so tell you what we'll do, Barry. We've got some hands over on this side of the room, to my left. So we've got some hands towards the back. We'd like to take and then we'll come back to the right hand side as well. So, okay, well, I can go next, then we'll go over to the other side of the room. Okay.
We know about Jeremy Corbyn. It's pretty obvious, and it's a very high profile character, almost worldwide. He's known as an anti-Semite. But what about that eminence grise that is in the background, John McDonnell? We don't hear anything of him, and I'm just wondering whether there's going to be a coup, like there was for the Mayor of London, when Ken Livingstone stabbed, what is his name, Archie MacDonald or someone in the back the day after Labour was voted in. Could this happen, and would John McDonnell be worse?
Well, look, I think John McDonnell is just as bad as Jeremy Corbyn in what he believes. In 2014, during the Gaza conflict, John McDonnell was supporting protests and boycotts against Israeli businesses, not just settlement goods. I mean, I would disagree with that, but against Israeli projects. And he supported violent street protests. He supported the IRA. I think his economic plans would be a disaster for the country. I think there's one area in which he differs from Corbyn, and it is that at least he's smart enough to realise that anti-Semitism is not a good look, and you've got to try and show that you're dealing with it. I think that probably makes him. I think he thinks this is the hard left's one and only chance to get power in our country, and he's determined not to let it slip through his fingers. So I don't just talk about Jeremy Corbyn. I talk about Jeremy Corbyn and the people around him. I think the people in his office. He's got people with long and dubious track records of extremism and supporting non-democratic regimes around the world. So I don't think these are people that can be trusted with our democracy.
I think, Paul over there, and on the same row there's another gentleman further down. Okay.
I want to ask you about two people.
Yeah.
One in the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, and the other Justin Welby. And I want to ask you if you think that they're saying enough on this topic. Keir Starmer, former DPP and a strong one too, seems to have risen to the top of the Labour Party. He's spoken out occasionally on anti-Semitism, but for my own part I'm disappointed that he hasn't spoken out more strongly. And Justin Welby, I can't remember him speaking out about anti-Semitism at all recently.
Look, as I said before, I think every member of the Labour Party, certainly in the shadow cabinet, people who have aspired to leadership should be doing much, much more on this. They should be doing much, much more. It's not good enough to say, oh look, we had a motion of confidence in 2016, it didn't work. I don't want to use a violent analogy, but in a boxing match, if you don't knock out your opponent with your first punch, you don't stop fighting, right? And I think that from the word go, the idea of Jeremy Corbyn leading a mainstream political party was a disgrace. And I think that people should have been doing everything they can to deal with that from day one. It's the most urgent thing. I think it's a much bigger problem potentially for our country. I think that I don't know why you'd want to be in the sort of shadow cabinet sitting alongside Jeremy Corbyn. I don't understand that. And I don't understand that if you're not, look, I think there's something wrong. If you're in the Labour Party, if you're a Labour MP, and you're not getting out of bed every morning thinking, what can I do today to try and get rid of Jeremy Corbyn? Really, that for me is the test. On the Archbishop of Canterbury, look, I don't know, I'm not an expert, I did bump into him in the House of Commons, and he congratulated me on the stance I've taken. We were waiting, actually. I was chairing a meeting about Israel, and he asked me what we were doing in the corridor, and I told him, and he said that this was very important work, and he was very encouraging. So that's the only contact I've had with him, but on that basis, he seemed okay to me. I mean, I don't know what he said about anti-Semitism, I'm afraid.
When you said that Labour MPs should stand out and speak out, so there was a vacancy created now as for the chairperson of Labour Friends of Israel.
Yeah.
And of course it's now Louise Ellman.
Yeah.
But there was no non-Jewish member of the Labour MP who was willing to stand.
I don't know what the process was by which Louise became the chair. I think she'll be a fantastic chair. She's a great friend of mine. Joan Ryan is a great friend of mine too. and she's going to be the sort of president of LFI. And I'm just as active in LFI as I ever was before. Obviously, I suppose having left the Labour Party, I couldn't share it, could I? But look, I would say, I think there are quite a lot of Labour MPs who are supporting LFI. You go to the annual lunches, there are more there than we've had in the past. I think perhaps they see this as a way of showing some support. I don't know what the process was that resulted in the election of the chair. It's always been a non-Jewish chair in the past. You're right about that.
The other matter then comes about people speaking out. Well, the Labour Party has been taken over at grassroots level.
Yeah.
So many MPs are fearful of being deselected.
Yeah.
As is the Labour MP for Riverside.
Yeah. I know. Look, it's a disgrace. Look, it's an outrage that Louise Ellman is being targeted because she's Jewish and because she's spoken out about anti-Semitism. I mean, that is a complete and utter disgrace. It's a complete disgrace. And it will be an outrage if she is deselected. It will show how bad the problems in the Labour Party have become. This is what I think has happened. I think that people who were previously in fringe organisations, extremist hard-left organisations, have joined the Labour Party to support Jeremy Corbyn. That's happened. Some people with unacceptable views have been emboldened as a result of his leadership. They feel they can speak out and say things that they wouldn't have said but probably believed, possibly, before. That's happened as well. But the really appalling thing is when you get people who've never thought about these issues before, but who think Jeremy Corbyn is some sort of wonderful, virtuous guy, and so they think all this must be a smear and a plot, and they end up coming out with things that are anti-Semitic themselves. I mean, I've had people who 10 years ago would never have been thinking about these things. One guy said to me, Ian, have you not heard of the arrangements between Adolf Hitler and the Zionists? What Ken Livingstone has said was true. Now, I think that is the most unforgivable thing, because they are quite literally poisoning people's minds with hatred and racism. And I think that is absolutely shameful, really appalling. I think that's the worst thing about what's going on. And I think it's going to take a long time for the Labour Party to recover from this.
Okay, so while Barry's on that side of the room, so I didn't see Ivan before, so I'll make sure I haven't neglected anybody on this side before we come back to this side. And then you're waiting to speak as well. So while Barry's over there, we'll take a few more points from this side of the room.
Ian, I've been asked actually to ask this by my neighbour who's not Jewish, but that's irrelevant. I'm not sure what he's looking for. He's asking, can you show him where anti-Semitism is actually in the Labour Party? I think what he's meaning is that people saying, I don't like Jews, or they're doing it another way. Who is guilty of this? I'm not sure what he's looking for, but you understand what I'm looking at?
Well, I think that if after all...
Are people saying, MPs, to other MPs, I don't like Jews, and, we shouldn't do this, we should do that?
Well, some people are saying really appalling things like that, yeah. But just look at the things that have been said. Jewish women MPs being told they don't have human blood, being subjected to terrible violent threats, mad conspiracies about Israel, singling out the world's only Jewish state for boycotts and sanctions. When people say, oh, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm anti-Zionist, what do they mean? What does that mean? What does it mean to say, I'm anti-Zionist? I mean, I think the basic belief in the homeland for the Jewish people makes you a Zionist. That's what I think. So if you're saying you're an anti-Zionist, so you're saying that you think the state of Israel shouldn't exist? And don't tell me, by the way, if the only country in the world you want to get rid of is the only Jewish one, that you're not an anti-Semite. So I think there are lots of ways that anti-Semitism has taken root in the Labour Party. I think the leader of the Labour Party has said and done things which are racist himself. Is it not racist to defend a grotesque racist caricature? I mean, he says he didn't think it was anti-Semitic. I mean, you don't have to look at that. You don't have to have an expert. You don't have to have a sort of doctorate in anti-Semitism studies to realise that that mural is anti-Semitic. You don't. Right. Was it not racist when Jeremy Corbyn said English Zionists don't understand English irony? As if they're somehow different from the rest of the population? Is that not racist? Of course it's racist. I think there are lots of ways that racism has taken hold in the Labour Party.
Okay, Barry. Just before you leave that side of the room, anybody else on this side? Okay, so it's Carl. Yes, I'm sorry.
A lot of us here are here not because we know you so well politically, but because of your action in how you rebelled against the party. hindsight now, having been outside the Labour Party for a short period of time, do you feel that your action was correct in leaving the party? So many people do say that, it's good to stay in because then you're in a position of knowledge and can do more good when you're actually a party member than when you're outside it.
Okay. Well, look, I do understand this. Look, I told myself, you stay and fight, but I didn't feel in the end that people were taking this sufficiently seriously. And I left to shine a light on it and to demand other people stepped up. Look, in the short term as well, the week that we left, it took 6 percentage points off Jeremy Corbyn's poll ratings. Right, now, if you want to stop Jeremy Corbyn becoming our country's Prime Minister, that's worth doing, I think. I think the other thing is as well, Tom Watson, he's a good friend of mine. I speak to Tom all the time. After we left, he set up this Future Britain group as a way of bringing moderate and decent Labour MPs together. He said to me, look, Ian, if it hadn't been for you and Luciano, I wouldn't have done that. It sort of stirred him on a bit, pushed him on. Of course I wish, that more people were more vigorous in dealing with this and were taking tougher action all the time. Of course I do. But in the end, I am absolutely certain that I did the right thing. Absolutely certain. Absolutely certain. I spoke to my dad the night before I was going to leave. I rang him up and I said to him, Dad, I just want to let you know that tomorrow I'm leaving the Labour Party. He said to me, I thought you would do this. He said it's the right thing to do. And actually, I wasn't really going to talk about this, but my dad died actually earlier this year. He died in April. The last conversation I had with him, he said to me, I want you to know how proud I am. I agree with all the decisions you've taken. So I have no doubt. I said when I left, I wouldn't have been able to look my dad, I wouldn't have been able to look Jewish friends of mine in the eye if I'd stayed in the Labour Party. I wouldn't have been able to come along and talk to all of you this evening about these issues. I said before, it's a basic question of fairness and decency, of what's right and what's wrong. When it comes to an issue like this, I know whose side I'm on. And I wasn't prepared to be in the Labour Party, and I certainly wouldn't be prepared to knock on people's doors and tell them to make Jeremy Corbyn the Prime Minister at the next election. And it's going to be interesting if there's an election. It's going to be difficult for people, because at the last election in 2017, we all went round saying, look, what happened, right? Theresa May thought she was going to get a landslide. That's why she called the election. The press thought she was going to get a landslide. Jeremy Corbyn thought everybody thought she was going to get a landslide. The Labour MPs went round their constituencies saying, when people criticised Jeremy Corbyn, they would say, look, don't worry about that. There's no way he can win. The only question is, who's the best MP for Dublin? Now, because of Theresa May's terrible campaign, she had a manifesto that was sort of designed to chase the voters away. She wouldn't debate, she couldn't engage with the public. Corbyn, expectations have been so low, he managed to sort of exceed expectations. He did better in his campaign, and because the press thought he couldn't win, he wasn't really subjected to any scrutiny. He got away with it. Nobody said, well, look, do his plans for tuition fees add up? Any of this stuff. So he did better than had been expected. Although, even against a terrible Tory campaign and everything falling apart for Theresa May, she still beat him. People should remember that. But anyway, I think the fact that he did unexpectedly better last time means that if the government collapses or is forced into an election, I don't think members of the public, they will think there is a threat of a Corbyn government. They will not believe Labour MPs who say to them, don't worry, Corbyn can't win. And anyway, this should not be the choice that a decent political party puts in front of British people. And decent Labour MPs should be working night and day to try to do something about that.
Okay, so I think, Barry, we're going to start this side of the room now, if that's okay. We can always come back. I just saw a hand go up at the back. We can always come back, don't worry.
Just two little points. Jeremy Corbyn sat on the backbenches for a lifetime, as long as I've been aware. And he was known to be a Marxist.
Yeah.
And he was well known for it.
Yeah.
And Karl Marx was an anti-Semite.
Yeah.
So, in some respects, it's not surprising he holds these views. It just shows how fickle people can be when it comes to it. Secondly, our local MP, Fabian Hamilton, we have had no sign of him, as far as I'm aware. Have you met him at all? We don't know what his attitudes are. Can you enlighten us?
This is a difficult question, isn't it? And I want to be sort of, look, I speak for myself, right? And I don't want to be critical. I don't, because I think it wouldn't be right, to go to somebody else's, to go to another MP's constituency, and I'm not sure that would be the right thing to do. I think that I used to have quite a lot of contact with Fabian. I remember when there was a motion in Parliament to commit to the sort of unilateral recognition of Palestine a few years ago, and the Labour Party put everybody on a 3-line whip to support this, and I worked really hard to persuade people not to vote for it. And actually I remember Louise Elman and I, we had a long discussion about this, because Louise wanted to vote against it, and I said, look Louise, if you vote against it, there won't be that many of us, but if we abstain, we can get more, we can sort of undermine it more, if we get people not to turn up. That's what we agreed to do. I remember speaking to Fabian, and Fabian was one of the people who abstained. He agreed with me that, look, we want to see a Palestinian state, but it can't be sort of achieved by imposing it from outside. It's got to be the result of negotiation, dialogue, discussion, compromise. It's counterproductive to the cause of peace. I'm sort of going off the subject really, aren't I? But for the Palestinians to think that it can be imposed from outside without them having to engage in negotiations and compromise. So, look, Fabian and I worked together on those things. I haven't really talked to him about these issues. I don't think it's for me. Look, I don't think it's for me as a non-Jew to tell a Jewish MP what they should or shouldn't be doing. I don't think that's for me to do. And I don't think it would be right for me to... I'm sorry, look, I want to answer everybody's questions, but,
Well, thank you very much. Very interesting, and really admire your bravery and your actions. Just one area that hasn't been covered, perhaps, just to put out there, is maybe in the inner sanctums of the Presidium or the Labour Party, whatever you want to call it, the Soviet or...
I think they call it the Politburo, don't they now?
Okay, that one as well. Maybe there's a cynical, mendacious attitude that really anti-Semitism, in the scheme of things, is not important. For every Jewish vote they lose, if you go to the Muslim community and say they're anti-Semitic, they're anti-Zionist, they'd like to see the destruction of Israel, I don't think it would be a vote loser. And maybe for every Jewish vote they lose, they'll pick up 10 or 20 Muslim votes, or guarantee them. And I'm pretty certain that the pulpit directions will point that way, even if it's not something that they think of themselves. And we haven't mentioned Islam and Muslim, and we've got a shrinking community, and they've got a hugely growing one that's far bigger. So is this a Labour plan just to give a party that maybe picks up votes from the growing community?
Well, don't ask. People ask me similar questions all the time. Why do we think this is a problem? Is it because it's calculated? Is it cynical? Is it planned? I mean, don't ask me to account or explain. I think that, look, whatever the motivation, it's unforgivable. But I think for people like Jeremy Corbyn, he has spent sort of 30, 40 years mixing with all sorts of extremists, in some cases anti-Semites. His view of Israel in the Middle East is central to who he is. He can't change his views on this. It's what he believes, it's what he's always believed. He believes that the creation of Israel was a mistake, I think. And when he's visited Israel, he doesn't spend time talking to mainstream Israeli politicians, even the Israeli Labour Party, even people on the left in the Knesset. He spends his time in Ramallah and in Gaza, talking only to one side of people in this debate. Look, I think that if you want to lead our country, you've got to represent everybody in it. You've got to bring the whole community together. As I said at the beginning, I oppose racism, whoever it's directed at. I stand with the Muslim community when they're targeted by racists in Dudley. When we had that thing a couple of years ago, do you remember that Punish a Muslim Day? Somebody wanted to, some crazy right-wing guy wanted to organise. And I sort of went around the mosques, showing my sort of solidarity and support for people. So I think that you can't sort of play these cynical games. You can't think, I'll represent this group but not that group, I'll turn this group against that one. And I think as well, decent British people know this is wrong. In a community like Dudley, as I said to you before, No Jewish people at all. They know this is wrong. They know this is wrong. They don't know the detail and the history and all of that, but they know when something's gone bad. They know it smells bad. When you talk to them, by the way, if you use the word anti-Semitism, they're often not too sure what that means. When you talk about anti-Jewish racism or racism against Jewish people, I mean, I'm a big cyclist. I'm in a cycling club. I'm 5 mile on a cycling club. This guy said to me, he said, "Hey, what's going on? It says 2018. How can this stuff still be happening?" People are aghast. And there are millions, I think, there are lots of decent people in Britain who will not vote for a party that's mired in a scandal like this. They won't. So if they do think it's some sort of cynical plot or whatever, I think they'll find they made a big mistake with decent British people. And by the way, I think lots of Muslims, they're just as appalled by racism. And they know that racism's wrong, whether it's directed at.
I wonder if you can give me some hope. As a proud Blairite, an ex-Labour member supporter, how long do you think it'll be before I can rejoin my party?
The most successful Labour leader in history is the most unpopular in the Labour Party. The term Blairite is now an insult. And they think that, I'm proud of the record of the Labour government. Record investment in the NHS. Before the Labour government in 1997, it took 30 years to build a hospital. We built 100 in a decade. Record numbers of doctors and nurses and police and teachers. I think of course we make mistakes, of course. What government doesn't in 13 years? But I think that's a record to be proud of. And I think if you take out Tony Blair's the 13 years of Labour government that we had, and the Labour Party's existence, the Labour Party's been in existence then for what? Over a century? And in more than 100 years, it had only 13 years, in addition to Blair's, only 13 years of majority Labour government. So I think we should be learning, that's the number one lesson we should be learning, isn't it? That you win elections from the centre ground, and you win elections when you appeal to a broad group of people, and when you persuade people who voted for other parties in the past to vote for you. Now that is the opposite of the approach under Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn and the hard left's approach appears to be to drive people away, and to sort of, turn in on yourselves. And if you don't what did John McDonnell say when Luciano was being bullied? He said, oh, well, look, these weren't the exact words, but it was almost well, look, if only she apologises and renounces her criticisms and pledges loyalty to the leader, as if it was some sort of Soviet show trial, it'd all be okay. Look, I think it's going to be a long time. And even if the next leader, number one, if the next leader's not as bad as Jeremy Corbyn, it's still going to take a long time before we get to the place where we might get one who can win an election, or who would deserve to win an election. I mean, up until a few months ago, I would have said it's not possible for Corbyn to win. But I think in the current state of British politics, it's pretty unpredictable. If the government collapses, who knows what might happen? And in our electoral system, you don't actually need to win a huge vote to win. You just need to do a little bit better than the Tories. And you've got a Corbyn government. That's what worries me. So I think it's going to take some time, even if the next leader's not as bad as Jeremy Corbyn. But the truth is this, the hard left have never had this chance, ever. I think the mainstream of the Labour Party was complacent. I remember at the beginning of the leadership election, I was saying, come on, it's ridiculous, there's no way Corbyn can win. We were complacent. We did not see this coming. We didn't realise what had been going on in these far left campaigns and all that. I think as well, the mainstream candidates for the leadership were complacent, didn't come up with new ideas, didn't have answers to the challenges facing the country. We'd become managerial, bland, and that created a vacuum, and Jeremy Corbyn filled that vacuum. I think when you lose an election, you can't blame your opponents, you've got to take responsibility for that, and that's the same in the Labour Party as it is in the country. I think that, I think lots of young people, I can understand why they're cheesed off with the state of politics. They go to university, they come out with debts of £50,000. Lots of them, they can't find a job in the places they're from. They have to move to London. They can't afford anywhere decent to live. They can't see the prospects of being able to buy a home of their own. They don't think that the system is working for them. They're angry and cheesed off. And they look for answers. I think that the challenges the world faces now are big, massive, complex questions. Climate change, the ageing society, technological change, globalisation, migration. I think these are no longer temporary phenomena. They're permanently with us. Massive changes. The world's changing faster than ever before. And in the face of that, you can either have people like me who say, you know, it's all very difficult, we've got to work harder, we've got to be better educated, we've got to have higher skills, or you can have people who come along with simplistic populist answers. Whether that's Trump in America, build a wall, or Corbyn in Britain, tax the rich, end to austerity, or, you know, stop the immigrants, or whatever it might be. I mean, these aren't answers. They're just slogans, aren't they? But the challenge is for us to work harder, to come up with better answers, to communicate them more effectively. That's the challenge for mainstream politics. I'm sorry not to be able to offer more. Anyway, you asked me to offer hope, I don't. I'm sorry.
We are coming towards the end of the evening, Austin.
Ian,
and I would ask you if we can give us a bit of hope. You've given a great analysis of the problem. You've covered the history, as most of us would agree to the letter that was waved on. But we haven't really had any hope at all. And what worries me is that the momentum, which I think has a lot of resonance with the brown shirts many years ago, is going to make the position worse for the Labour Party, that these moderate members that you have been referring to are going to be deselected and are not going to, maybe if there's an election in November, maybe they will still be there, but if there's something's not done very soon, momentum is going to be able to get rid of most of the moderates, and then there's going to be no chance at all of a Labour Party revival. Can you see any way of combating this?
I think in the short term it's very difficult. I think in the short term it's difficult to see how the Labour Party can recover in the immediate future. As I said before, I don't think the hard left are going to let this chance slip through their fingers. So the most hopeful thing I can say is that I think it's possible to prevent Corbyn from becoming Prime Minister. I think that whatever people think about Brexit, I think a Corbyn government would be much worse for our country. I think it would be a disaster for Britain. And I'm determined to do everything I can to prevent that from happening. So that's the most positive thing I think I can say at the moment. You know, and that is, and I think that's possible. You know, it's definitely possible to make sure that doesn't happen. Yeah.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands here and thank Ian. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to mention I was in Israel last year on a trade mission with UK, Israel, to do with technology. And what was inspiring is that in Israel, which you don't hear about in the UK, in Israel, venture capitalists are investing a lot of money in Palestinian businesses based in the West Bank and various places. So while I was there, I asked if a number of the individuals would come to the UK and talk to our community about the incredible work and the investment that's going into those communities. Unfortunately, they couldn't, because if they did, there could be obviously a situation where people's they could be under threat, the people in the West Bank, in terms of their security and their family security. So to be able to get Ian to come here and actually talk about obviously and tell you his story and make sure that people are aware that more than 70 years ago, 6 million Jews were murdered. It wasn't the only Holocaust in the world, but it was obviously pretty much nearly wiped out the Jewish community. Over 70 years on, we've got to stand up and we've got to fight, not with our fists, but as in a democracy, like in Israel, and even more so, we've got to fight harder in the diaspora to stand up for what is important and to stand up to make sure that people realise that the Jewish people and any other religious respectful organisations religions, that we respect them and we make sure that the people like Jeremy Corbyn and other anti-Semites are dealt with in a democratic way. So I really appreciate Ian coming here because, and hopefully, with Ian, with his new role, he'll be able to bring over the people that I couldn't entice to come and tell you all the great things that Israel are doing to support, communities in the West Bank, Arab communities. I'd like to thank McCaw and UGIA for being part of this evening and supporting it. So I want to thank you. You can put your hands together for McCaw and UGIA. I want to thank BHH, the President and the Exec Committee, and obviously our wonderful Rabbonim, Rabbi Kleiman and Rabbi Sufrin, for helping us put on this evening. Thank you. I want to thank Jane Clines, who's always organising these events. She never gets mentioned, but Graham's here, so you can tell her I mentioned her. Okay. And then obviously I want to thank the Ladies Committee and the caretakers and everybody for supporting the event.
Radio Jacob. This is your Leeds Jewish